Be here, I feel like I'm home. Family in the audience and friends in the audience. The Great Northwest is, despite the chill outside, a warm place for me. So, especially with fires blazing in LA right now, it's good to be here. First, let me recognize and acknowledge the Native peoples who allow us to be here on this land, this sacred land, and give thanks for that. And and just say, I want to just applaud the work of Equity Education and Sharon's leadership. Equity work is hard because inequity is so deep, right, and so pervasive. And so we are definitely working up against the stream. And since this is a home to salmon, you know about how hard it is to go up against the stream. But we got to go against the stream because we know that inequity poses as much a threat to our future as climate change. It is that serious. And so that's not to minimize the danger of climate change. It is to simply say that when people are losing their homes, the way we see right here in Seattle and Tacoma, and when people are not able to live and eat, and despite all the vast wealth that surrounds us, we know that conditions are getting worse and worse and desperation is growing. So the work you're focused on is critical. It's critical to the kind of future we're going to have. And I want to commend you for focusing on decolonization. Okay? Now, having spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, which was colonized not that long ago, I know a thing about decolonization. And one of the things I know is just because you get rid of the ties to the colonial power, and you have your own flag, and your own stamps and your own currency, doesn't mean that colonialism is ended. Decolonization is a process, not an event. And part of that process is changing minds. Because colonial subjects often cling to the colonial master long after colonialism is ended. And one of the ways in which the colonial ties are maintained is through education. Because education and religion allowed the colonial masters not to have to rely exclusively on violence. Because, of course, colonialism was made possible through violence. But once you establish yourself, then you get a chance to convince the colonial subjects that they should be subjects. And that work requires that you convert them to Christianity, and then you have to also convince them that everything about them, who they are, is inferior. And the only way that they could ever hope to become anything approaching a full human is to become like the colonial master, which they could never be. So they create a feudal exercise, right, which is essential to the maintenance of colonial power, right, where the colonized subject seeks to be like the colonizer. And as we know, that leads to deep self-hatred, deep wounds, a deep sense of inferiority. And that's why decolonizing education is so critical, because it is as we undo that work, that damage, that we can begin to create whole people who can take control of their lives. So I want to just acknowledge how important this work is that you've undertaken and how critical it is to equity, and often overlooked. Right? That is, if we change the way we fund schools, and we should, right, to make sure there's equity in funding, and if we change the way we organize the schools so that teachers are well prepared, but if we don't change what kids are learning in those schools, then nothing will change. Nothing will change. They will continue to see themselves as inferior beings. Carl G. Woodson wrote a famous African-American historian. Wrote an important book called The Miseducation of the Negro. It says, you teach a person to sit in the back of the bus long enough, after a while you don't have to tell them to go there. They will just go there themselves. So understand that history is important, because as we know, the history is still very much alive. This image I have up here is of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Think about this. It took a Republican president, right, Dwight Eisenhower, sending federal troops into Little Rock to desegregate those schools. It was the first time since the Civil War that federal troops have been sent to the South to escort 9 black children to school. And they faced mobs who came out to harass and to try to block their entrance because they understood that as you desegregate, you start to break down the walls of white supremacy in this country. As we know, desegregation, like decolonization, is also a process, and it didn't end with the arrival of those 9 students, because the fact is that today, our schools are as segregated as they've ever been. All across America, segregated not only on the basis of race, but on class too. Because in this country, we concentrate low-income children of color in the same schools and usually underfund those schools. We're the only country that thinks that's a good idea. Right? We spend the least on the kids who need the most, and the most on the kids who need the least. And so, not surprisingly, desegregation is unfinished work, but it's important to recognize that that work, despite all the flaws, despite all the ways in which it did not really address all of what our children needed, nonetheless produced benefits. Some of you are the beneficiaries, myself included. I went to school at a time when schools were integrating in New York, and one of the things I learned is how to deal with white people, which proved to be very important once I got to college, because I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel as though I was less than. I felt I deserved to be there, a right to be there, and therefore I could advocate for myself. And if you look at the data, what it shows is that period from the 1970s to the mid-1980s is when we made the biggest gains in advancing equity in this country. And it wasn't just desegregation, it was also because there was a war on poverty that we were engaged in. And we had health care programs and preschool programs and housing programs, because at that time we understood you could not advance equity by simply focusing on schools. You had to focus on health care and housing and the quality of life, because kids don't live in school. And when kids are hungry, they don't do so well. Well, what's happened in recent years is we only focus on what happens in schools. I'm doing an interview today with a reporter wanted to talk about the recent test scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, where the test scores are flat once again. And the aggregate test scores are misleading because they don't show us the disparities behind them. Because right now, it continues to be the case, a child's background will predict how well they will do. Family income, combined with how much education the parents had, especially the mother, because the mother is usually the first teacher, will predict with great consistency how well kids will do in school. But we know it doesn't have to be like that. We know that because right here in this room, I'll bet you there are people who come from families that neither of your parents had education, and neither of your parents had a lot of money, but you've been able to get education and do something. How many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from college? Look around the room. How many come from a family where neither graduated from high school? Still hands, mine too. And all of us who raise our hands are living proof your background should not determine what you can accomplish in education. But that can't just be a slogan. Question we have to ask, is that what's happening in our schools today? When we look at the classroom, when we look at who's in those gifted classes and who's in those honors and advanced placement classes, how much of it is about the backgrounds of our kids? When we look at who's in the remedial and special ed classes, are we going to see the most disadvantaged kids? Because that's what the patterns show. The patterns show that the kids who come with the greatest needs usually get the least in the way of education. And they also get the most in the way of discipline. Who do we suspend? Who do we expel? We suspend and expel the kids with the greatest needs. And usually it's because of their needs. All you have to do is spend a little bit of time, figure out why is this child suspended, and all you'll start to see that there are unmet needs that are driving the behavior. Not to say they didn't do something wrong, because usually there's often a behavior issue. But if you're a child who is homeless, or you're a child who's in foster care, or you're a child whose family is just struggling to get by, often you come with other needs. Equity is about addressing those needs, acknowledging the needs. I like to point out to people, it's so obvious, but we often refuse to acknowledge what is obvious. Homework is an equity issue. How many of you help your own kids with homework? Even when you're tired, sleepy, and don't understand it. You'd rather go to sleep. And how many of you know very well there are students in your schools right now who have no one to help them, may not even have a place to get the work done. But they're being judged based on resources and circumstances they do not control. So here's the danger. The danger is that we pay a lot of lip service to equity, but very few schools are actually doing the equity work. So we ask, why is it that the outcomes aren't changing? It's because we haven't done the work yet to change the outcomes. So I want to talk about what that work looks like. And I want to start by pointing out the difference between what I'm going to call the technical aspects of that work and the adaptive aspects. The technical aspects usually are about being in compliance with the state or with your funders. It's about managing the operations of schools so you don't get in trouble. But that's not where you make a difference in terms of equity. The equity work is adaptive. It's adaptive because you would have to acknowledge that the first thing you got to do is know who those kids are. Because if you don't know the kids, you're not going to know how to serve them. And you got to know who their families and their communities are, because if you don't understand who they are, you'll see them through a lens of a deficit. You'll see what they can't do and not recognize any of the things they can do. And adaptive work is what allows you to work with teachers who come in with low expectations. Or teachers who have fear of the kids. Can the kids tell if the teachers don't like them? Or if the teachers are afraid of them? Well, those are teachers who are not going to be able to serve our kids. So the adaptive work tells us we've got to help teachers get better, because we're not going to fire our way into better schools. We got to figure out how to get people to get better. We got to build their capacity so they can serve the needs of the students. So all that's about adaptive work. Building the culture of a school is adaptive work. You can't do it from your office. You can't just do it by fiat. Say, from now on, we'll respect each other. I wish it was that simple. You actually have to work on the relationships. You have to work on building a common vision so people can work together. And there are a whole lot of folks who think this work is easy because they've never done it before. And I think Sharon was the one who told me, she said she was a teacher for all of how long? 12 minutes. She said that was enough. Because she realized how hard it is. This is not easy work. I would say the best thing we can do in education is pay teachers more money and make it harder to become one. Make it harder to become one. And then make it easier to stop being one if you're no good at it. Say, oh, sorry, we wish you could have done this, but you can't. Because the hardest thing to teach a teacher is how to build relationships with kids. Relationships across the differences of race and class and language and culture. Because kids learn through relationships. It doesn't matter how much you know, if you don't know how to build that relationship, you will not be effective with our children. The hardest thing to teach a teacher, how to build relationships. And we've all seen why it works, because we will see kids who will work for one teacher, same child with another teacher not working. And over again, I'm in schools and I see this play out over and over again. Schools that complain about discipline. I say, well, I bet you have some teachers that never have discipline problems. Why don't we find out what they're doing differently? And that always makes people uncomfortable. Because then they start to realize the problem is not the kids. Yes. The problem is the adults. Yes. And it's only when we start to focus on the right problems that we can start to get real progress in equity. So, real progress starts with this basic question. Is your district, is your school ready to serve the kids? Sounds obvious. But being ready doesn't mean you have a building. Right? Being ready means you actually have to know what those kids need, because the skills of the educators have to match the needs of the kids. If equity work's not about doing that, then you're focused on the wrong thing. And it'll show on your data if the skills match. If the kids can't read, you know what it means? It means the teachers can't teach reading. Is that too difficult? They might know how to teach reading to somebody else, but not to the kids they have. If your school is a place where there's strained relationships with the parents, then that's the equity work you got to focus on, because all the research shows that when parents are reinforcing education at home and when there's trust between the parents and the educators, the kids will do better. Kids do better. Hardest thing to do? Build those relationships. Build that partnership. So there's reinforcement for education at home based on trust in the school. So equity work forces us to ask real basic questions about our children. How do they learn? Just think about that question. How do kids learn? Most kids don't learn the way they're taught in school. Don't believe me? Watch a kid play a video game, a new video game. Do they download a lecture first to get some direct instruction? Or do they get on there and play? Kids learn by doing, not by sitting and listening, right? If they're having trouble with that game, what do? They ask for help. They'll call a friend. Some kids will go on YouTube. We call that cheating in school. No, you learn through collaboration. You learn through interaction. You learn through mistakes. Are your classrooms places where it's safe to make mistakes? Where mistakes are part of the learning, as opposed to something we use against them. And ultimately, we know our kids are learning when they experience mastery. Think about that for a moment. How do you know you're ready for a higher level in the game? Because you've mastered the lower levels. Well, think about how many of our kids are in school and can't do more advanced work because they haven't mastered the foundation. They can't do algebra, they still can't multiply and divide. And how do we miss that? You know, we have going on in all of our schools, educational malpractice. Think about it. We have kids being pushed along, end up in high school reading at 3rd and 4th grade level, and all the educators who had them before act like they had nothing to do with it. They see it, but we're more likely to blame the parents than to ask, what do we do wrong? So shifting the focus of our work. What do you really know about the kids? Are you teaching the kids the way they learn, or expecting them to learn the way you teach? When you teach the way they learn, you teach differently. Learning is about doing. Learning is about collaboration. Learning is about making mistakes, which means there's got to be an environment where it's safe to make mistakes, where there's a sense of community so kids can learn from each other, because that's how you actually learn things. So if equity work's not focused on how to do more of that, you're focused on the wrong things. So I try to make it simple, and a lot of people have seen this image and say, oh yeah, we get it. Can't treat everybody the same because they're not the same. Some people come with greater needs, and if you don't scaffold, if you don't find a way to make it accessible, then those with those extra needs will be left behind. And so people look at that image and say, okay, I get it. I said, but then why is it that you treat everybody the same in your school? I'll give you one simple example. The schedule is inequitable. Because we have lots of kids at school whose job it is to take their younger brother or sister to school in the morning. They have to because their parents are going to work, which means that often they're late to school. They're late to school not because they're hanging out, they're late to school because they have a job to get their brother or sister to school. If we don't figure out how to accommodate that, we're going to keep losing the kids who have those responsibilities. You know the number one reason why kids drop out of school? They drop out of school to work, especially immigrant kids. If you don't show kids how they can use their education to earn a living legally to support themselves and their families, we will keep losing kids. And so that's why when I see schools that say, well, our graduation rates are rising, a lot of times I don't believe them. Because if they haven't changed anything, I know that it's game in the system. And I can look at the data and I can see because the 9th grade is usually a whole lot bigger than the 12th grade. And some schools have a perverse incentive to get rid of kids, don't they? Kids who bring their scores down. Or kids who will give a lot of trouble. We're not too upset if they don't show up, are we? So what are we doing to make sure that equity work is really the work we're at? One of the things we don't recognize sometimes is some kids are doing much better than others. They start out so far ahead. They got two parents with lots of money, but think about what they do in the summer. They're traveling. They're in rich summer camps. If they need it, they got a private tutor. When the SAT or the ACT comes along, they know a doctor who'll get them unlimited time on the exam. Inequity exists. This cheating scandal over the college admissions just opened up just a little bit of that inequity that's out there. We should not be surprised by that scandal because this was going on for so long. Right? Jared Kushner, how did he get into Harvard? His father made a $20 million donation to Harvard just before he applied. They don't call that bribery. They call that the way things are done. So privilege is the other part of this that we don't often see and acknowledge that makes the system so unequal. That's why equity work has to be about eliminating barriers. The barriers to learning. I want you to think about your schools, your communities, where you work. What are the barriers that get in the way? What are the barriers that make it difficult for kids to learn? Sometimes the barriers are food, hunger, health. Sometimes the barriers come up in school. People that really don't want to see you, don't care about you. What are the barriers that you've got to address? Because equity work has to address the barriers. Well, here's one of the barriers we have to contend with. That's our history. And those of you who know this history just from Native Americans know that education was one of the ways in which this country, carried out extermination. Right? Look at the slogan, kill the Indian to save the man. The idea was to literally strip those children away from their communities, take them away to produce someone else. And all you have to do is go onto reservations and know the consequences of this kind of a strategy over time. But it's not simply Native Americans. That same history shows up in different communities in different ways because who we educate is a function of who we think is worthy and how we educate them. And so in too many of our communities, the communities that are the most marginalized, that have historically been excluded, what we see are schools that continue to perpetuate their marginalization. It's a byproduct of that history. However, this history can be interrupted if we know what it is that we have to do to address it. So I put a lot of emphasis on addressing what I call structural racism. Now Tim Wise at lunch alluded to this when he talked about going through the ghetto and his child asking, how come there's only black people here? He talked about the red line. He talked about the history of discrimination. Here's something that's interesting to look at. You know what? There are no ghettos in Canada. Now, I don't want to oppose what they do on the reservations, but you can go to Canada. You can go to Windsor, Ontario, right across the river from Detroit, and there's a thriving black community. Unlike Detroit, which is bankrupt and just ground zero for most of the urban problems in the country, cross the river and you will find a stable, thriving black community. There's a reason why black folks escaped this country and went to Canada. We're more humane. The conditions in this country are a product of our history. And the structures that maintain these conditions are what we have to address. Structures that allow certain schools to continue to languish. Just talking to someone here about Rainier Beach High School. Where is she? There she is. They invited me there several years ago. Now, how is it possible that Rainier Beach could consistently produce world-class athletes? World-class athletes. You go on down the list. Rainier Beach probably produces more than any other high school in Seattle. But meanwhile, that school is academically struggling, enrollment struggling. Why can they produce football and basketball players there? Because we care more about football and basketball than we do about education. That's why. If we cared, we could produce doctors and lawyers out of there. But it's a question of will. It's a question of focus. And it's a question of understanding how the structures make that difficult to do. Those are the structures that perpetuate inequities in our society and in our schools. And so it's also important to realize that even when the people in charge of that system change, so we appoint a black superintendent. You have a Native American superintendent right now in Seattle, don't you? Does the structure change, or do we now just have window dressing? My colleague Edward Barnillo Silva said you can have racism without racism. If the people run the system, perpetuate the same system, nothing changes. Nothing changes. And so equity work's got to force us to hold everyone accountable, not just those who look differently. Right? Everyone's got to be accountable for the outcomes, what's happening to our children. That's the only time things change. So a lot of folks have gotten, I think, confused about this. And they think, what we got to focus on is implicit bias. Implicit bias, do implicit bias training. And so Seattle did it. How many millions of dollars they spent on implicit bias training? And Portland did it. They had courageous conversations, didn't they? And how much changed? Not a damn thing changed. Why? Because they didn't change what mattered the most. They didn't change those relationships. They didn't really change the beliefs. And they certainly didn't change the structures that maintain that inequitable system. So we can't be fooled. We can't be fooled. It doesn't mean that bias is not real. Bias is real. But only time I've seen anti-bias training work is when people are open. And I'm willing to admit, I got a problem. It's like I've never seen someone stop being an alcoholic who wasn't willing to admit, I am an alcoholic. Well, you can't get rid of bias unless someone says, I am biased. I learned it from my family. I learned it from my parents. And I want to be a different person. Show me. And don't just try to convince me through some kind of exorcism to get rid of my bias. Show me what to do differently in the classroom. How do I teach my students so they will see and develop the greatness that they have inside of them? If bias training is not about that, it's a waste of time. So if your districts are thinking about it, don't fall for it unless it's grounded in a sense of how we're going to treat children differently, how we're going to work with parents differently, how we're going to work with each other differently. So we have to give educators real clear guidance on how to do this work. The biggest barriers to equity are complacency. The belief that the problem lies in the families. And every time I go to a school where they're blaming the families, blaming the kids, I know that's a school that will never improve because they don't believe that they can do it. They don't believe it's in their power to change. I also know that there are a whole lot of folks out there who see poverty as an obstacle, and it is. I already said, kids who are homeless, kids who are hungry don't do as well as kids who are fed. But poverty is not a learning disability either. There's absolutely no evidence because you're poor, you can't learn. We have, in fact, lots of evidence that kids who are poor, under the right conditions, can thrive and be successful. Our work should be about creating those conditions. When you create the conditions, kids will thrive. I'm a gardener. Any gardeners in the room? Okay. And in LA, we got a long growing season. So I got tomatoes, I got peppers, I got eggplant, I got all kinds of things. But my cantaloupe did not do well. And at first I thought there was something wrong with the seeds. Until I saw my neighbor's cantaloupes and I said, oh, he got good cantaloupes. Now I didn't go home and start cursing out my cantaloupes. I knew that I did something wrong. I had not created the conditions for my cantaloupes to grow. They needed maybe more water, more sunlight, better fertilizer. You get the conditions right, you know what happens to kids? They will grow. They will thrive. They're just like the vegetables. Get the conditions right. That's what we should be focused on. But we focus, again, on the wrong things. We got to address the bias. We got to address the lack of capacity in our teachers. Because education is one of the few fields where we will deliberately take the least experienced people and give them the most challenging jobs. I don't know why we do that. I'm so glad we don't do that to pilots. There's a storm out and say, let's get that new pilot out there to fly, because nobody else wants to fly. And we don't do that to doctors. We got triple bypass, you're brand new, go ahead. But we do it to teachers. We got 8th graders that still can't read. You go. You just got out of school. Go. And we take that 22-year-old who comes in all enthusiastic. By the end of the year, she's actually 52. And she doesn't want to be a teacher anymore. And she hates kids and she hates teaching. Because we set her up and we set up the kids. And sometimes it's so obvious, but no one is willing to call it out and say, this will never work. This will never work. And as you're really committed to equity, you've got to be willing to call it out. Speak truth to power. So I want to encourage you to recognize that part of what equity is about acknowledging the differences amongst our kids. You know, some of our kids, even in their own family. How many of you have more than one child? I have 5. Anybody with more than one child is an equity expert already. Because you already know they're not all the same, right? Even in your own home, they're not all the same. You know, my first one, he was walking at 9 months. I was so proud, as if I had something to do with it. The 4th one, she'd walked till almost 15 months. I said, what is wrong with her? Well, guess what? They're all walking around fine now. Not all kids do things at the same pace. And part of what we do that screws kids up is not acknowledging those differences. And not recognizing, guess what, some kids will need more support. Some kids need a hug in the morning because they don't get a hug at home. And some kids need a time to rest because they didn't get enough sleep last night. And understanding those different needs is a critical part of equity. Responding to those needs in a thoughtful, caring manner is critical to equity work. Because when we're responsive to our students, to their culture, to how they learn, then our kids know they matter as people. And again, we can see that in the teachers that get us to learn the things that we thought we couldn't do. How many of you had a teacher at some point in your career that got you to learn something that you thought you couldn't do? Look at all the hands. Got you to overcome your fears so that you actually were performing in something that you thought you couldn't do before. I had Miss Harris in 8th grade for math, algebra. I was okay in math till algebra. Brought the X and the Y into it. I said, oh no, this is not math anymore. I didn't like math. I had Miss Harris. The first day of class, she said, you kids are lucky because I'm the best teacher in the school. And that meant she knew how to teach kids. You know, some people think they're really good, but they only know how to teach kids that don't need help. You ever meet people like this? They're really good, but I'm only good at helping kids that don't need help. Well, she was one that could teach all kinds of people. So she said, how many of you struggle in math? I said, I reluctantly raised my hand. She said, well, you all said up front. But she was an evidence-based teacher. She wanted to see the evidence that we were learning. Because she knew if you weren't learning in September, you definitely wouldn't have learned it comes June. That's in contrast to faith-based teachers. You know, faith-based is, let's pray that they learned it this year. When the scores come out, let's hope that the scores go up. She wasn't like that. She wanted the evidence. And she wanted us to let her know. If you don't understand something, raise your hand. Tell me. Tell me. I want to know. And Miss Harris wore a lot of perfume. So if you weren't paying attention, you know what happened? You smelled just like Miss Harris. You better pay attention. She was not playing. My point is, when you see educators who are making a difference for kids, that's what you got to do more of. That's what's telling us that's what it takes. You know, we act like this equity work is so hard, and we have people out there that have been doing it. Who are the educators you know in your schools that your child is safe with them? Your child's going to learn with them. Those are the ones that should be teaching others. And too often, those teachers are working in isolation. And no one even recognizes what they do. So if you're serious about advancing equity in the state, you got to open the door and show what's going on. We also have to call out the injustice. Because there are too many cases where kids are not being educated and no one is doing anything about it. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is ask the kids. Ask the kids right now in any school, and they will tell you where they're learning, and they will tell you where they're not learning. But it takes courage to ask the kids, doesn't it? Because now that you know, the question is, what are you going to do about it? They tell you, you know what? Every day we watch movies. Every day we play cards. The teacher's disorganized. Now what do you do? Because now you know. takes courage to ask the kids, because the kids don't lie. You know what I also found about kids? Kids will learn from anyone who cares about them. You don't have to be the same background. If you care, the kids can tell. They'll learn from you. So the issue is not the kids. The issue is how we treat the kids, what we expect of the kids, whether or not the kids are challenged and stimulated. That's what it's about. So equity is not about lowering the standards and expectations, making excuses because of poverty. Say, oh, well, this kid, look at the family. They can't do this. No. Because they have that family, they need even more help. It's not about, and I know there might be some chief equity officers here. If it is, I hope I don't offend you. But every time I go to a district and they got a chief equity officer, I ask, who reports to you? And if the answer is one assistant, then guess what? That's just tokenism. That's tokenism. I was working with a district in Colorado. They lost their chief equity officer. The superintendent asked me, what should we do? I said, you become the chief equity officer. Because the system will only change when the people with power are insisting that change occur. So don't fall for window dressing. Don't fall for initiatives and meetings. Sometimes people confuse talking about something with doing something. You're on an equity task force. Where's the plan? Where's the evidence that something happened? Don't tell me about the meetings. What happened because you met? If nothing happened, then you're wasting time. It's all hot air. So don't fall for that. Don't believe that this is only an issue for kids who are children of color or kids who are poor, because there are equity issues amongst affluent white kids too. Working with a district right now in Silicon Valley. These are children whose parents are engineers and scientists at Google and Apple. And they got equity issues even though their kids are going to some of the best colleges in the country. You know what the equity issues are? Anxiety, depression, suicide, cheating, sleep deprivation, bullying. They got equity issues, but they're not willing to look at them because they're looking at the test scores. You know what we know? You get high test scores, but you're a cheater and a thief, we still got a problem. You get high test scores, but you're strung out on drugs, we definitely got a problem. An education that's not grounded in ethics, an education that does not prepare you for life, is an education that does not serve you well. And so we need to be clear about what equity really is. No Child Behind got us confused. And I have to say, No Child Behind in some ways was an equity-based initiative. Because for the first time in the country's history, said there's got to be evidence that all kids, regardless of their backgrounds, are learning. Now, the only learning they look for was how well you did on a test. And that was part of the problem, right? Because we know there's so much more going on than just that one day when you take the standardized test. Especially when we know there are kids out there who don't get good scores because they can't even type. Think about that. How many have you seen it? See, watch the little kids taking the test, dude. And if there's recess after the test, they go through fast. Especially if they got some pizza. But No Child Behind said, we're going to disaggregate the scores by race so we can know which kids are performing, which kids are not. And then lo and behold, we start seeing these disparities. The disparities were already there. No Child Behind just opened them up, said, look at it. But it provided no guidance on what to do. So your work's got to go a step further. You've got to say, okay, we know where the disparities are. Now we're on this state that is saying we don't know what to do. So you have a challenge. Can you move this state to say we've got to do more than simply exposing the problem? Washington's putting money into schools for the first time in a long time. Do the districts know what to spend it on? If you just spend it doing more of what you've been doing, you'll get more of what you've gotten. Money makes a difference, but only if you know how to use the money in ways that allow it to make a difference. And so I want to encourage you to be engaged. I also want to encourage you to be careful about the way race gets used. Not every racial problem has a racial solution. I was trying to explain this to a reporter the other day. She said, well, a lot of schools have problems with black males. So they want to separate the black males. You know, prisons separate black males too. Yep. It's not exactly a positive intervention. I was working with a school in Oakland that did this. They were complaining because they said, well, our problem here is behavior. Too many kids with bad discipline. The superintendent was saying, you got to raise the score. I said, help us with the discipline, we'll raise the score. He said, okay, I'm going to send you a specially trained teacher to work with the kids with behavior problems. And so the teachers identified the kids with the behavior problems. They identified 24 boys, all black males. But he said, and they put them in a separate room with a black male teacher. He said, he's going to be Afrocentric. He's going to do everything with those kids. But he's on a separate classroom, separate day, right? Separate schedule. He was my former student. And I knew, the only thing he knew was that he was big. Because that's what they thought. A big man could control the kids. Well, within a day or two, the kids turned on him. Because they knew they'd been isolated. They knew they'd been set up. They got ugly in that room. But the interesting thing about this is what happened in the other rooms. I went around and asked the teachers, well, how's your classroom now that they got rid of the kids with the biggest behavior problems? You know what they said? They said, new kids have emerged. New kids with behavior problems have emerged. And you know what we need? We need one more teacher like that to take away some more of these bad kids. And then, you can imagine what would happen after a while. They'd just have a school full of teachers like that. Meanwhile, there'd be nobody in class. And then at a staff meeting, I said, you know what? There are some teachers at this school who never have behavior problems. Why don't we find out what they're doing differently? And then everybody got uncomfortable, got quiet, because that meant they had to look at themselves. But equity work that doesn't force us to look at ourselves is not real equity work, because we are implicated in the problem. And so I want to encourage you, when you're looking for examples of how to move things forward, look for positive deviance. Positive deviance means, guess what? Not all kids of color are struggling. Some of them are doing well. Find out which ones are doing well and what are they getting. Because if you look at the ones who are thriving, they'll tell you what the other ones need to. I learned that I was doing some work in Evanston, Illinois. They asked me to help them figure out the achievement gap, what to do. I said, well, do you have any kids of color at this school that do well? They said, we have a few. I said, let me talk to those kids. They brought me 8 kids, seniors, all doing well in school. And we talked about the experiences of what it was like to be the only one in advanced placement classes and how hard that was. And then I asked, what's your favorite subject? And each one said their favorite subject was calculus. And I was shocked to hear calculus. I never hear calculus as the answer to that question. I said, well, what about calculus? They all had the same teacher. And they described a teacher who was so committed and so good at building trust and building relationships that each one of those students was now going to go off to college and major in math or science-related field. So I went back to the superintendent. I said, well, here's the solution to your problem right here. You got to get other teachers to learn what he's doing. 10 years later, I came back. He's still working in isolation. Still working in isolation. He said, Pedro, they still haven't come to see him. Why? Why is it that when we see the results, we don't ask how to do more? So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask those kinds of questions. Don't be afraid to teach kids about how the system works. Our kids need to know early on that they live in a society that's unfair. That people will judge them based on how they look, how they carry themselves, how they dress. You empower the kids once they know that. I say, you go on that job interview, this is how you got to carry yourself. When that policeman stops you, this is how you got to do it. Otherwise, it could go bad. These are life and death issues. They may not be on the state framework, but if our kids don't learn this, they will find themselves denied opportunities because others are judging them. We got to go beyond that. We got to make sure that our kids have access to an education that expands their horizons. Because being poor often means you don't know anything about your neighborhood. And so you need to be exposed to role models who are doing other things. You need to travel abroad because traveling allows kids to see the world and realize I am not a minority, I'm part of the world. You know, Garfield High School in LA where I live now is the school where Jaime Escalante was called. Some of you, if you haven't seen the movie Stand and Deliver, I recommend it. It's still one of the best education movies there is. And it's a true story. He's a Bolivian engineer. Decides to stop being an engineer and go teach math at Garfield. He gets there and they assign him to teach remedial math. And he says, this is a waste of time. It's not preparing kids for anything. They should learn calculus. And his colleagues say, not these kids. These are the children of factory workers, and these are gangbangers. These kids can't do calculus. He said, watch me. So he starts teaching calculus. And when he has the kids take the advanced placement exam, they pass. So they assume he had to have cheated. So they require the kids to be retested. And they retest and they pass again and again, 19 years in a row. So eventually they sent in researchers to study what's he doing. And the researchers came from the university, UCLA, Berkeley, Stanford. They all came back and said the same thing. They said, it's nothing but math. Because they didn't understand what he was doing. He was shifting the narrative. He told him, you are the descendants of people who built pyramids. Math is part of your heritage. It's not foreign. And then he took them to labs. He said, you need calculus, you can get jobs like these. And then he challenged them. He challenged their parents. He said, no, they shouldn't be working in the restaurant. They should be working in math. I met one of his students. She's the only Latina who works as an engineer for Boeing in Southern California. And on her weekends, she does robotics in the schools with kids. And I said, how come you're here? She said, because I'm giving back, because it wasn't for people like Escalante, I wouldn't be where I am. She said, everything you hear about him was true. He was there for us. He pushed us. He got us to work hard. He developed ganas in us, the desire to learn. How do you develop that in kids? The desire to learn. He said he used to come to my soccer games. He said, he came to your games? He said, yeah. But he didn't cheer me on. He told me I stink at soccer, go back to math. I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did, because that's why I can do what I'm doing today. So over and over again, we have to learn from examples like these. Examples which remind us that education can be a tool for liberation or oppression. Either one is possible. You know, if you focus on assimilation and conformity, you're going to get kids who are passive, who believe the lies about them, that they are dumb and unable. If you focus on affirming their culture and developing those higher order thinking skills, you're going to get kids who are problem solvers, who are creators, who are leaders. That's what our schools have to do. Has to develop that sense of agency in our kids. Agency is not the same as grit. Grit is about working hard. And I'm shocked that this woman, Angela Duckworth, got a MacArthur Genius Award for saying people need to work hard. It's like, wow, that's a genius? I thought that was an old idea. You got to work hard. But how many of you know people work hard every day and are still broke? They're working 2 and 3 jobs and they're broke and tired. It's not just about working hard. It's about understanding how to navigate those obstacles. It's about how to build social capital, about how to get help when you need it, how to think critically. That's what agency is about. And agency is not just about what you do as an individual, it's about what we do collectively. Because we make a difference when we work together to overcome these obstacles. So when we look at examples like these and schools that are making a difference, we can see what's possible. So here's the school I work with in Los Angeles right now. It's called Social Justice Humanitas High School. 100% low income, 100% Latino, 4th highest graduation rate in Los Angeles. The only school in Los Angeles where the students evaluate their teachers. Only school. I asked the teachers, what's it like to work here? They said, it's great. I said, what makes it great? It's because we work together. We plan together. We plan our lessons together. Because they want to make sure that what the kids are learning in math is reinforced in science and history. I said, what's the hardest thing about working there? They said, oh, the feedback from the kids. They don't hold back. My teacher said, this girl told me I was disorganized. We didn't talk for 2 years. But the other day, she told me I'm getting better. We're on speaking terms again. This is a school surrounded by gangs. And there's not been a fight at the school in over 7 years. In over 7 years. You know why? Because they spend the first 3 days of school building community. So we got to get to know each other. We got to get to know each other. You got to know your teachers. They do that before the school year begins. I said, how do you get the kids to come? He said, we just tell them they have to come. And they do. And because the kids know them, and trust them. They will let them know if there's a fight brewing. They will let them know if there's trouble at home. They will let them know because they trust them. So I was suspicious when I visited. I thought, they're only showing me the good classrooms. I walked the halls with the principal. I saw he knew all the kids by name. I said, let me talk to some kids. So I talked to about 20 kids. And I asked them what it's like to go to school. They said, what makes a school like this work? They said, because it's like a family. We look out for each other. We help each other. I said, how often are you inspired by what you learn in school? Well, the kid said, every day. I said, I don't believe you. I go to too many schools. I said, what did you learn yesterday? Girl, raise your hand. She said, yesterday we learned about the forced sterilization of women that was occurring in this country in the 1930s during eugenics. I was so disturbed. I went home and talked to my father about it. We went back and studied on the internet where this happened, why it happened, who was involved. You know what happens when kids get a good education? They want more education. Because good teaching is like good cooking. Right? How you know someone's a good cook? Because you said it's damn good, I want some more. How you know someone's a good teacher? The kids will let you know that was good. That was good. How often at the end of the day the kids come to you and say, wow, that was a hell of a day. Can't wait to come back for some more of that. That's what education should do for kids. It should get them to see the power of knowledge. And when that happens, amazing things are possible. So here's the largest high school in the state of Massachusetts, Brockton High School, with over 4,200 kids, one of 2 urban schools in the state that gets a level 1 rating. All the other level 1 rated schools are in affluent suburbs. Brockton is a blue-collar, working-class community known for fighting. Rocky Marciano came from Brockton. Marvin Hagler, the boxer. They are the boxers. There's a boxer out front. If you Google, you will see that, a fight at their last graduation. Kids and teachers fighting in the stands. But you know what they're known for now? Writing. Because in 1997, when the state was about to implement their high-stakes exams, and in Massachusetts, if you don't pass the exam, you don't get a diploma. A group of veteran teachers got together and said the only way our kids can pass is if every teacher becomes a teacher of literacy. Because the kids are coming into high school reading at 3rd and 4th grade level, they can't do the work. So they need to learn literacy in math, in science, in every subject. Principal said, good idea, but I can't make the teachers do it. So you don't have to make them. We'll work with those who are willing first, and we'll build. Say, okay, but I can't pay. He said, you don't have to pay us. We'll do this on our own time. Teachers teaching teachers. They started in 1997. By 2002, when the first exams were given, 50% of the kids passed. They projected that 75% would fail. So they said, oh, it works. Let's stick with it. So they continued. That meant they had to win over other teachers. They had to win over the PE teachers. I definitely don't do literacy. I'm PE. I had to win over the art teacher. By 2006, every teacher was doing it, and 80% of the kids were passing the test. By 2010, it was 90% of the kids, 1/3 of the senior class getting the highest possible score. They got them a full scholarship to any public university. You know what they didn't do at Brockton? Is sit around and blame the middle schools. So, fix the middle schools and the high school get better. They didn't sit around blaming poverty. They could have blamed poverty because this is a community with homelessness and drugs and all kinds of problems. So, no, we're going to meet the kids where they are. Principal retired a few years ago. Sue Satchel, she said, Pedro, I'm retiring. You like to send people to visit? They won't find me anymore. I live in Clearwater, Florida. I said, you worried about your school? She said, not at all, because the teachers own this work, not me. And the schools continue to make progress ever since. So here's what the Boston Globe had to say about Brockton High. The Boston Globe called Brockton High a cesspool in 1997. It said it was the worst school in the state. In 2009, they said Brockton High has every excuse for failure, serving a city plagued by crime, poverty, housing foreclosures, and homelessness. But Brockton High, by far the state's largest public high school with 4,200 students, has found success in recent years that has eluded many of the state's urban schools. MCAS scores are soaring, earning the school state recognition as a symbol of urban hope. You do that in Brockton, you could do that in Seattle, you could do that in Tacoma, you could do that in Kent, you could do it all over this place. It's do we have the will to do this? So I want to encourage you not to be afraid to raise the tough issues. Sometimes equity work is about raising the difficult issues. calling it out when you see kids being denied the opportunity to learn, challenging people in leadership who are complicit and allowing it to happen. They might be nice people, but they're not nice enough if they're not allowing the kids to be educated. And so we've got to recognize that we're going to move from the schools we have to the schools we need. We're going to have to do this work. And it won't happen overnight, but we've got to make sure we're at least moving in the right direction. You are not alone in this journey. The question is, will you build allies along the way? There should be a movement across this state. A whole movement demanding that this state, with all its vast resources, care as much about its kids as it does about those Seahawks. Like if we loved our kids as much as we love the Seahawks, it would be no problem for education, would it? Our kids will rise to the level of our expectations. Our challenge is raising those expectations. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.